if we don't stop China now, Taiwan will be the next place that will fall to communism, and then we're going to have a domino effect of communist takeover throughout Asia. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's exactly the Vietnam playbook.
Yeah,
right
if you really get into history, then you look at McCarthy and all the prep of saying, you know, communism is going to destroy the world and take over the world, and it's an ideology. You know, it in a sense it works or it doesn't. What concerns me now with China is all the prep that you see. It's all this, they're a real threat to us. We need to be ready. This could turn into war. China really at the core is like us. What China really wants is a great economy and trading with the other countries in the world. I think that happens a lot in the media and politicians. They give you two choices.
Right.
And in this case with China, look, we can either fight or we die. You know, it's this dramatic choice.
Right.
The reality is there are other choices, and there are better choices. Those aren't the only two choices.
That's right. Hello everyone, a quick break from today's video to give a huge thank you to our video sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Now, many of you who've been following this channel know that I'm on the road for the past 30 days, traveling around the United States of America, my home country, and one of the tools that I use on a daily basis, and that has literally made this trip possible, is a virtual private network from Surfshark VPN. Currently, I'm in a co-working space here in downtown Orlando, and again, when you're in these public areas, it is absolutely imperative that you're keeping your data secure, private, and confidential. And this is what Surfshark VPN does. It gives me that security that when I'm on the road, my data will always be protected. Now, as we're coming up to the end of the year, Surfshark VPN is running an incredible promotion. Simply use my discount code Cyrus at checkout. You're going to be able to receive 83% off the retail price. In addition, because you're one of my loyal subscribers, they're also going to throw in an additional 4 months of service for free. And finally, this is a no-risk offer, as Surfshark VPN also offers you a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're in the market for a VPN, please give Surfshark VPN a try. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to today's content. Well, everybody, my name is Cyrus Janssen. I want to welcome you back to another episode of Real Talk China, and today's location is very special as I'm back in my hometown of Orlando, Florida, and I'm joined by author Terry Wittenmyer. Terry, how are you today?
Doing great.
Now, everybody, if you have been following the channel for a while now, you have seen Terry in a previous episode. He is the author of Fearing China. Terry, you wrote this book because you're a businessman, you know, that is doing business in America. You and I are very similar in our goal of you know, that the United States and China ideally need to find a way to work together. Tell everybody a little bit about, you know, what inspired you to write this first book.
The book came about from my first couple of trips to China. I had read a lot about China, and so I thought I knew what was going on over there, and I had read, like everybody else in the U.S., all the negative things that were reported on, so I was ready and expecting to see the pollution, the corruption, the terrible cities and everything, and I get over there and it was a lot different than what I saw. And so when I started looking into a lot of those details and researching the things I would read in our newspapers, I would find that a lot of them just weren't accurate and some were outright lies or incorrect. So the book came about from basically a very long 2-year research project, personal research project, of me digging into what about China pollution, what about China corruption, what about democracy versus their more meritocracy type of government. And so that's how the book came about, was just a recognition that a lot of what we see in the Western media is not correct.
Well, I enjoyed reading this book, and for everybody, if this is your first video that you're watching, Terry and I sit down for a full talk about this book. But we're going to talk about something different because I'm back here in my hometown of Florida. Terry, you're also
welcome back.
Thank you. It's good. It's good to be back. And you know, you reached out to me because you knew I was coming home, and we said, hey, let's get together. Let's sit down and make another video because we have a lot of important things to talk about. You know, when we're dealing with China, we're going to be highlighting a recent article that was published in the Wall Street Journal, and it is entitled "Containment Can Work Against China Too." And this is a really big article that Terry and I are going to break down in today's video. But before we jump into this, Terry, I want to get your a little bit of insights from you, about the United States and, kind of our histories with war, because it does seem right now that, the United States government, our politicians, our media is pushing us very much towards a potential conflict with China. And, you brought up a lot of interesting points about we have a lot of experience with wars, unfortunately. So share with everybody a little bit, your thoughts on this?
My read on history is there's kind of different types of wars. World War II, certainly there was an aggressor, a military aggressor, Hitler, trying to take all of Europe and invading countries with troops. That was a true, serious, aggressive adversary.
Correct.
And we saw the same thing in Asia with Japan going into China and other parts of Asia, trying to take all of Asia.
Right.
So that's one type of war, and those are absolutely worth joining with other countries to try to push back against and don't let the expansionist aggressor achieve their goal.
Correct.
But we've been involved in too many other wars, I think, that weren't about that. They weren't about invasion or a border, someone crossing a border trying to take a place.
Right.
They've been more ideological wars. If we look at Vietnam, more of a civil war, but we jumped in because we had an ideology, one side that we wanted to support. If you look at Korea, same thing. It was basically a civil war, but we jumped in because we thought one side should win.
Correct.
Based on ideological. If we look at Iraq, Afghanistan, we tend to get sucked into some wars. They say it's about our security,
Correct.
but if in hindsight, when we really look at it, usually it's not about our security. And so my concern is that we start getting into wars over ideological differences and not out of a true need for security on some of these issues. So
No, that's a good point.
I don't think it's a good idea for, if you look at Vietnam or Korea, 2 million people in Vietnam dying over an ideological spat. You know?
No, it's a good.
So that's a concern I have.
No, I agree, and I think it's really important as well. When we talk about the future of the United States, I mean, you and I are both proud Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we love this country, but it's also good for Americans to speak out and express, some concern, because one of the things that you said I really like is we can't be in a war to start talking about being against the war. That has to really come before this. We're going down this pathway. I think you and I see very clearly, along with many Americans, saying, look, we're going down a pathway to war with China. This is where the alarm bells need to start ringing. This is where we need to be sitting down, having a discussion, hopefully educating more people, and saying, I always like to say, and I think you'll agree, of course, is you have to study history or else you're going to repeat it.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's some ideological differences. Is there ideological differences between the United States and China? Absolutely. You read a whole book on that, basically comparing, this is how China does it, this is how America does it. Not so much that one's good and one's bad, but they're different. And that does go down to cultural differences, goes down to history. There's a lot of different elements that we do need to examine. And I think when we look at, for example, even Vietnam, I mean, that was a very long conflict that had happened in America, and eventually we had to withdraw, and we never won that conflict. And Vietnam remains a communist country to this day. Similar with Afghanistan, we finally, pulled out of Afghanistan after 20 years of a war that we never were going to win. And so I think that is really the basis, for today's talk.
And we start seeing the anti-war protesters come out. I mean, in Vietnam, we gradually got into Vietnam, and then typically it's a lot of times it's the younger kids that finally look at the situation and say, why are we doing this? So you saw it in Vietnam, you saw it pushback on Korea after we were in the middle of a war. Then the U.S. citizens start saying, why are we there? We shouldn't be there. Same thing with Iraq, Afghanistan. American people get kind of conditioned in advance that we need to go over there, we need to do this, we need to, it's a big threat.
Correct.
And then after we're in the middle of one of these wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, then the anti-war movement finally starts. And I think it makes sense at this point in our history for us to start pushing back on the pre-war.
Correct.
Because when the media and the politicians, if you start reading what they are saying and doing, they're preparing you for this.
Right.
And they're telling you why you need to go to war. They're telling you, in this case, they're telling you China's a threat. They're going to threaten the economy of the world. They're going to threaten the militaries and the security of the world.
Correct.
So they start to condition you the same way they conditioned us for Iraq.
Right.
Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Turns out he didn't.
Correct.
But that's part of the prep that they do. And what concerns me now with China is all the prep that you see. It's all this, they're a real threat to us. We need to be ready. This could turn into war.
Correct.
And I'm not just thinking of an actual war like World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, but also a Cold War. Cold Wars are not as bad, obviously, but they are bad. They're incredibly wasteful. I mean, the Cold War with the Soviet Union was incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And we pretend we won, but did we win? I guess it depends what our goal is.
Right.
Because if you look at the people of the Soviet Union, they're still not doing that great.
Right,
You know,
right.
we won. We kept them in starvation. You know, what does winning mean? And
Right.
if we pushed back against China earlier and stopped their rise, what would that have meant as a win for the U.S.? Would that mean, oh, good, we kept their economy down? They're still at $1,000 per person. You know, GDP per capita. Is that a win in a Cold War? I don't know.
Yeah, you
what
brought
our
up
objective
some
is.
good perspectives, because I think when the United States established diplomatic relations with China, I think a big goal of that was to to help Chinese people out, and to really help open up that economy, to see the average life of Chinese people improve, and I think that has been achieved, and that has been achieved. The United States, Canada, Western countries around the world, having established these diplomatic relations, it's been a two-way street. Both
Right.
China has benefited, both these Western countries have also benefited, and the Chinese have also come up, and that's also been through good leadership and planning from the government. I mean, certainly the planning aspect is really remarkable in China. How again, China's in the 14th consecutive 5-year plan. They have these very ambitious goals that they set out every year for their country. They're moving forward, with a one-party state, which certainly has some advantages and some disadvantages. But one of those is certainly from the planning and from an economic perspective. There's very accurate and real targets that are set, and almost all the time they're met. As they're continuing to do these 5-year plans and seeing that. And I think the big thing you said there is conditioning. And that's something that
they're preparing the American psyche for the next conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for everybody watching, I've been back here in America now for about 2 weeks, and I've been chatting with a lot of my fellow Americans here, and I tell them what I do on YouTube. I tell them about China, and there's always just a lot of stereotypes that come out, and I found many people here to actually be very open to hearing what I have to say. And their message is, well, isn't China's government trying to overtake democracy? I mean, don't they want to destroy America? And I said, well, no, I don't see that at all. I don't see them wanting to overtake us in any way. If anything, I see China, building, partnership and deals with countries around the world. That is what the Belt and Road Initiative is. It's again, if you're wanting to do trade, China is all about doing trade and doing business with you.
Right.
But if we get into ideological changes, I think that is where China is going to push back and say, well, we're not interested in that aspect.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the media wants to tell us that China has hegemon ambitions, that they want to rule the world. They want their system all over the world. And China's pretty clear that they don't want that.
Right.
China really at the core is like us, or like Germany, or Great Britain, or like France. What China really wants is a great economy and trading with the other countries in the world. So their motives are really close to what we want and what we've been doing for years. We went into China so we could sell more. Now we sell 3 million. General Motors sells 3 million cars a year to China.
Yeah.
Apple sells millions of iPhones. So that's, yes, I hope that we have some hope for the betterment of the people in China, but also a lot of our motive for Nixon going over there as well. That's a huge market. If we open this up, it would calm down the tension, but also if they can get things going, that's a big market for General Motors and Ford and Apple and all these companies. So I think their motive is very similar to ours. We like to think it's different.
Yeah.
We like to think, oh, their motive is they want to control the world.
Right.
Their motive is they want to grow their economy, just like we want to grow our economy, or Great Britain, or Germany, or France, or any of the great first world economies.
Yeah. And that's a good point you brought up when we talk about containment. And let's just go ahead and get into this article from the Wall Street Journal. Again, it highlights saying containment can work against China too. And it really goes in, talking about this conflict, the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And I kind of get the feel from this article, Terry, it's very much trying to justify there was a big need for that Cold War, and ultimately we came out on top. And given that precedence, now it's time to do it again. Time for Cold War 2.0, and China's the next victim. And again, this is really what I get the sense is that it's really trying to sell this to the Americans. Guys, if we don't do a Cold War with China, we're not going to be number one anymore. So this really is our only option. That's kind of the feeling that I got from this article.
Yeah, I found it to be an amazing article. That it's the same pitch that we've heard prior to other wars.
Yeah.
This other entity, in this case China, is a threat. We've got to bring them down while we can.
Right.
This article is trying to convince you that there's such a threat that we have to take the same approach with China that we took with the Soviet Union. Of course, there's huge differences between the current condition of China and the current condition of the Soviet Union, in particular economically.
Big time.
But
also,
also very clear on the military. The Soviet Union was pretty aggressive, starting to try to expand.
Right.
With their satellite countries and things like that.
Right.
China still is not aggressive on their military. Their military is there to protect the people of China, as it should be. If you look at the history of how many times China's been beat up.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
They have all the right in the world to have a large military and not get pushed around. And I think that is the core of their military ambition.
And I think our highest ranking military officer, General Miley here in the United States, I mean, he had even expressed to American people that a rising China is not necessarily a threat. And he had answered questions. What about them? The fact that they're building the largest naval fleet. What about the fact that they're building more tanks, more missiles, more and more bigger army? But again, it's like we've kind of seen that throughout history. Is that as a nation gets more progressive and as they modernize and they get bigger and stronger, it's kind of a natural thing that you are going to also build up a military presence.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, that's what we've done very well. I mean, we have a phenomenal military presence in over 600 military bases around the world. And I think it's just natural. I mean, again, in highlight, China has around 3 military bases. I think 3 bases right now in the world. So, I mean, nowhere close to the United States level. And I think, and I would agree with you, you said something very good there, is that they're really focused domestically on some of the issues. So again, when you're talking about, when we're talking about, some specific regions in China that are a bit controversial, Xinjiang, Tibet, even the city of Hong Kong, Taiwan, these are parts of China that, are sometimes under a lot of pressure and potentially, like, for example, there was a movement in Xinjiang, like a separatist movement. There are people that want to break away from China. So I think they're very much concerned with saying, look, this is our land. We want to keep China together here. I read an article last week that had said, if we don't stop China now, Taiwan will be the next place that will fall to communism, and then we're going to have a domino effect of communist takeover throughout Asia. Where have we heard that before? I mean, that's exactly the Vietnam playbook.
Yeah, if you really get into history, then you look at McCarthy and all the prep of saying, communism is going to destroy the world and take over the world, and it's an ideology. It, in a sense, it works or it doesn't. It's totalitarian dictators typically, and politicians that start wars.
Correct.
It's not the political ideology that starts the war. So it was odd to me that we go to all these wars to fight communism. If communism doesn't work, then it's going to fall on its own. It's you don't have to kill it.
Correct.
But this article really tries to put a parallel between Soviet Union and containment we use in Soviet Union and the containment they're advocating for China. And it really feels to me like another setup. They're trying to pitch this as you have to go after China now while you still can. And that's what we as Americans need to pay attention to. Again, don't wait till the war starts, whether it's a Cold War or a hot war. Don't wait till it starts. Pay attention right now while the hawks are trying to build support for the Cold War or the physical war. And push back. Don't wait to protest after the war started. I protest now. I say, no, stop this nonsense. Stop telling me that we need to contain China. Stop telling me that they're that they're a threat like the Soviet Union. Now's the time to have the anti-war movement. It's say, no, this guy and others like him need to stop pitching this threat. It's not a threat.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's really good. Let's talk about the Soviet Union and kind of that Cold War and how that really played out with America, because I'd like to get your perspective on that. I think you brought up something, asking a good question. We like to say, look, that was a big success for America. We took down the Soviet Union and that was a success. But I mean, what are some lessons that we could learn from Soviet Union that we could maybe look at this situation?
I suspect that the Soviet Union, I mean, although Reagan put a lot of pressure on them late,
Yeah.
The Soviet Union kind of collapsed under its own inefficiency.
Right.
China's not in that boat.
Right.
China's doing better and better because it's highly efficient.
Right.
But I guess the other thing we see is that the Soviet Union early on was a different structure. You had Stalin and some of these other guys.
Right.
But it was a whole different mentality. It wasn't I think it was an expansionist mentality.
Right.
That would be the bigger differences I would see, and they even would threaten the U.S.
Right.
Often that we're going to take you over. Who was it? Brezhnev? I forget which which of the leaders is at the UN slamming his shoe on the table, saying we will bury you guys.
Correct.
Well, that's not China. They don't have an interest in burying us. They have an interest in doing business with us.
Absolutely. I mean, they own a tremendous amount of U.S. debt. The bonds. China, from what I've always seen, is it really just goes back down to the economics. I mean, they're very interested in growing their economy, and I think also they're interested in making sure that they can govern the country the way that they best seem fit. And I think that it's really an interesting thing because when you look at the world over the last 40, 50 years, this success story of China is quite remarkable. There's other countries, maybe Singapore would be another good example of a country that's really just had this tremendous amount of growth and prosperity and done really well for its people. These are two glaring examples that I can give. But there's not a lot of them. And so I think when China says, look, we deserve a seat at the table. We understand that America is a great country. We understand that, economically you're very strong, but we've kind of done it our way. We've done it our way, and there is more than one way to build a great economy.
Right.
Terry, what was a part of the article that really stood out to you that you want to share?
There was a bunch to it, but the fact that the rival, like the Soviet Union before it, is driven by a potent combination of grievance and ambition, angry nationalism, intense autocratic insecurity, the grandiose designs of an emperor for life suggests that its challenge to the U.S. will persist until China's power fades or the nature of the regime changes. This guy's read on China is a lot different than mine. I don't see them having a lot of grievances from the past, even though so many countries have treated them poorly.
Right.
They tend to kind of say, let's move on. Right. I don't see them as angry nationalism. I don't see intense autocratic insecurity. I don't see Xi Jinping as insecure in any way, shape, or form. So I think they're projecting a lot of things from the Soviet Union era and trying to project that onto China, and it just doesn't stick. It's not there.
I do want to address the nationalism thing because I think it's an interesting thing that I've noted, when you're talking about the United States and China. A lot of times we hear, this difference between patriotism and nationalism. If we're two Americans and we have an American flag out and we start saying, I love America, we will always be labeled as, well, these two are patriotic. Right. But when we take the same situation, if you and I were both Chinese and we're in China, we're holding flags and we're saying, I love China, Western media is going to label us, well, you're brainwashed by the CCP. Right. You guys are nationalist. You're being forced to, love your country. It's almost like it's hard for Americans to realize that, there are many Chinese people that are genuinely very proud of their country. They're very proud of, what the country has been able to accomplish. Many Chinese have seen just a tremendous amount of prosperity and increase, but really every Chinese. I mean, if you've been around since the 1970s, I mean, you would have seen an unbelievable transformation, happening in China. And there is naturally, I have people reach out to me sometimes and say, Cyrus, I'm a international student. I'm a Chinese international student, and I almost makes me feel like I'm ashamed to be proud that I'm Chinese. And I'm like, no, you should be proud to be Chinese. That's where you're from, and China's done a lot of great things. There's nothing wrong with being proud to be Chinese. Right. But I think that's a thing that I tend to have a little bit of an issue with is when we say, what is patriotism? What is nationalism? A lot of times we really like to say Americans are patriotic, Chinese are nationalists. And I don't think there's any difference then, for example, when I'm back here on a holiday in America, we went to Disney with the kids and I saw so many Americans, having the red, white, and blue on, the American flag, 1776 Constitution, we are not made from weak men. I've seen all of these, these shirts like this. You could spin it the same way. I think you could, China could say, well, look at these guys. These Americans are acting nationalistic. I mean, I think it really is just a pride and being proud of your country. Yeah, and
I think people in China right now have an incredible amount to be proud of. I mean, the generational wealth that has changed over the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, my friends in China that are doing very well now, that are in business, they have great standard of living, they have security, they have safety. Their parents had it a little bit worse.
Right.
And their grandparents had it way worse. And their
Right.
great-grandparents had it way, way worse.
Right.
So if you, not that it's all about economics, but a lot of it is. If you look
Yeah.
at the standard of living, it is continually increasing in China. And frankly, that's a lot of what the pushback in the United States was, I think, during the Trump election,
Right.
was people were discouraged here that our standard of living wasn't increasing, at
Correct.
least for the middle class.
Yeah.
Over in China, the standard of living is dramatically increasing every generation. So
Correct.
I think they do have a lot to be proud of.
I do, and I will say that I think that is one of the biggest challenges for the government in China is the fact that, you know, I've said this in a previous video, you know, if you're, let's say you're 15 years old child in China, you've only really experienced a prosperous and wealthy China, and, you know, like you said, you know, you just gave a 4-generation example. You know, you got to raise the bar again for the next generation, and then the next. So there's a lot of pressure there for China's government, you know, to deliver those results. And I think that's where the legitimacy of China's government really comes in, because China has the data to say, look, we're here and now we're here. You know, this is a result of our government. Our government has done this. We're proud of this accomplishment. But how do we continue to get better? And I think it's interesting because in that article, it also talked about, you know, this emperor for life.
Yeah.
And you know, we do see, you know, Xi Jinping. I mean, you know, China in early November, they passed a 3rd resolution, which was really groundbreaking for China. Only the 3rd time in China's history. The first was 1945 with Mao Zedong, second in 1981 with Deng Xiaoping, and now in 2021 with Xi Jinping. You know, really, you know, this solidifies the fact that Xi Jinping is going to be the leader of China for the foreseeable future, pretty much as long as he wants to be there.
Right.
He's going to be leading the country. So, you know, the Communist Party has gotten rid of term limits. You know, Xi Jinping is solidified his place there. And there's been a lot of policies in the last 12 months that have caused a lot of people to
Get nervous.
Get a little bit nervous. But I think it's also, you know, China is also trying to take a step back and say, again, like the pressure is on us. We've got to deliver in the long term. We know that is the key thing for us. So let's take a step back. Let's introduce some regulations. Let's introduce some new policies. Might be some short-term pain, and we're gonna have to wait and see. I mean, I could be wrong on this. You know, China could be wrong on this, or it could be, you know, they could be really, you know, we might look back on this interview 10 years from now and be like, well, actually, China got it right, and they're actually moving on, you know, correctly. The economy's still growing.
China really looks at results. The people of China look at results.
Yes.
So my friends in China are actually fine with Xi Jinping staying on longer because he's gotten incredible results.
Right.
Economic results, reduction of corruption, reducing pollution. He's getting results where they matter.
Correct.
If you had a leader that was extending his term, but he wasn't getting the results, then you have a problem, or a bigger problem. I have a lot of friends from Venezuela, and they have leaders, you know, Chavez and now Maduro, that stick around and they are not getting the results.
Yeah,
you know, they're
absolutely.
drowning the country. So,
and I think that's an important thing, because really, you know, I have so many people reach out to me and say, you know, Cyrus, a big thing we hear about is freedom, you know, freedom. And I think freedom is such an important value here in America. You know, I would say that's probably the most important value. Americans would be literally would die for freedom. That is our culture here. But, you know, for Chinese, I think it's very much a little bit more logistical. You know, like freedom is that ability to live in a safe society, to have a house, to have good sanitation, hospitals, education. You know, if you're logistically improving your lives and, you know, these basic needs are being met, you know, for the vast majority of Chinese, that's a freedom. And that is certainly something that they're looking for when it's like, well, you know, yes, I don't get to directly vote for my leader, but I live in a 5th-tier city, and now we've got a new subway system, and now we have a new roads here, and we've just remodeled this school, and now we've built a hospital, and now, you know, my children are going to have a better opportunity in their life. Yeah,
it's kind of funny. I've got a good friend in China that told me when China was pretty quickly getting a good handle on COVID, and they were doing a lot of mandatory masks and then mandatory vaccines, and China was really cracking down on it. And meanwhile, the U.S., more people dying, but we had our freedom. You know, you could decide if you want to wear a mask. All this debate about masks and vaccines and all. And my friend from China said, we got it under control because you guys have too much freedom. I thought that's kind of funny.
I've actually heard that from. I've actually even heard that, you know, from some fellow Americans here, just saying, you know, we have a little bit too much freedom, and don't take that in the wrong way that I'm trying to say we need to be more like China. I think actually, It's quite amazing here in America with the COVID response. I mean, we're here in Florida, which is, one of the more open states. There's no real mask mandates here.
Right.
You can pretty much do what you want to do. And I think really for America, that is a good plan for America, if we're going to talk about that. Because, for example, America's done a great job rolling out the vaccine. So if you want it, it's there. And if you don't have to take it. If you want to wear a mask, you can wear it anywhere you want. And if you don't feel comfortable. And I think that really does suit well for America.
Right.
But I guarantee, but it's not going to suit well for China.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, Terry, what I always get back on in my videos is saying, there's always a cultural element that we need to understand when we're talking about United States and China. This mask is a great example of that. Let's go ahead and conclude this. And it's been a great chat with you again. And I want to just highlight a couple things from this article. And this says, a strategy of this nature, this is the Cold War now that we're talking with China, will make for a tense and sometimes frightening struggle. But containment emerged in the first place with Russia, ultimately because it ultimately prevailed, not because it was ideal, but it was because it was the best of the bad alternatives. Yeah, what do you think about that statement?
How terrible that he thought their only alternative was a huge Cold War getting too close to Russia.
Right.
I think that happens a lot in the media and politicians. They give you two choices.
Right.
And in this case with China, look, we can either fight or we die.
Right.
It's this dramatic choice.
Right.
The reality is there are other choices and there are better choices. Those aren't the only two choices.
That's right.
A better choice is, hey, let's try to work with them. Let's see how we can work some of these differences out.
Correct.
See how we can maybe join together in working on some issues like cancer or other healthcare issues or work
climate
on
change. Right?
Climate change.
Yeah.
So a lot of these hawks, if you'll call them, that are trying to prep you for war, they give you an either or.
Yeah.
It's kind of the George Bush. You're either for us or you're against us.
Yeah.
Really?
And then let me read
That's
this
my
next
choice.
one.
I'm either for you or against you. That's my choice.
And this is how the article concludes. Containing Chinese influence implies a return for the foreseeable future to Cold War-style tensions and crises. It requires once again discarding the dream of one world, a single seamlessly integrated global order, and accepting the grim realities of competition and a divided one. And I'll share my thoughts on this one because when this article concludes, it's a very convincing article. I can imagine that many Americans are reading this and they've almost accepted, well, it makes sense now. We really got to go to war with China. China's the enemy and we don't have any other option.
Right.
And it's almost, and again, we go back to how we opened this up with this conditioning, and saying, look, the only option for us is to go to war with China. And again, like I was on a flight here, to Florida, I was speaking to this lovely couple, and again, that was their thing. Isn't China's government trying to overtake our democracy? And I said, no, I don't know of anything like that, but I have to be honest with you, I'm worried about our democracy just from an internal perspective.
Right,
There's a lot of issues between Republicans and Democrats, and we look at the 2020 election, that was not a good election for democracy.
Right.
And on the grand stage, if people around the world are, America needs to be the shining light for the world. That's ideally what we would be doing. And I think, for example, if we want to spread democracy around the world, well, we need to make sure that our democracy is a great example of that.
Right. And you never hear Xi Jinping or other Chinese leaders advocating that we take on their system.
Correct.
Or that other countries take on their system. They just don't do that. They don't try to spread their ideology or their system. They just simply say, we're doing what works for us, you do what works for you, but stop pushing your ideology or your systems on us. And we don't push ours on you. That's simply what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Terry, it's been a fantastic chat with you. It's so nice to meet back here in Florida, and I'm really glad that we could break down this article, share some thoughts, and I really enjoy that because what I find is once Americans, we want everybody to realize there's definitely a bias in media. There's a bias out there in whatever you consume. So it's great. Watch your Fox News, watch your CNN, watch independent creators on YouTube, people that have done business in China like Terry and I for many years. This is really important that we understand, this global economy that we live in. And as we conclude this video, I just want to talk a little bit about this book. This is Fearing China, the book that you had authored a couple of years ago. If you're interested in seeing a full interview on this book, what we're going to do is we're going to put a link down in the description. A few months ago, Terry and I sat down, we broke down some of the great chapters in this. It was really well received. I'm also going to put a link down in the description if you're interested in purchasing a copy. Highly recommend it. Terry, you're an American that really understands the global economy we live in, and I'm really happy to connect with you again and again meet you in person.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right,
Thanks,
wonderful.
Cyrus.
Absolutely. Everybody, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for today's episode of Real Talk China. We'll see you guys in the next video.